edit Word documents at Sasko River Center. I am proud to today introduce my friends Marysa Walsh and Staudt, and they're presenting to our community the joys of self-regulation and how to DIY it at home. They're going to give us some great information. Usually I start this about 10:03. I give people like a minute or two to get on board. So we can maybe just, I think what we should do, perhaps Anne and Marysa, you guys want to introduce yourselves at the outset, and then you can get the ball rolling with your presentation. I've enabled screen sharing, so you should be able to do that. I'm here if you need anything technologically, and for moral support as well. You guys are the best. You're going to do fine. And anything else you might need. So Marysa, you want to take it away, and then perhaps Anne?
Great. Let me just try to share my screen and make sure I can get that. Is this working for everyone?
It's beautiful.
Awesome. Okay, great. All right. So yeah, we'll get the ball rolling. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see some of your faces. I recognize a lot of you, and I hope everyone's doing well. My name is Marysa, and I'm an occupational therapist here at Sasko. As many of you know, we specialize in sensory processing. So my job's really fun. I get to work in the sensory gym and work with a wide variety of ages, and it's really just a pleasure. I've been at Sasko for over 2 years now, and I'll let my co-presenter and colleague Anne tell us a little bit about herself.
So my name is Anne Staudt. Happy to see everyone today. I have been at Sasko for 3 years, a little bit over 3 years. And I'm actually currently working on my master's in occupational therapy. And just a little bit about my background. I became interested in occupational therapy because my son had issues, related sensory issues when he was younger. When he was about 4 years old, his preschool teacher came to me with some concerns, and we did some testing, and he had auditory processing. And then of my own pursuit of all the issues, we embarked on occupational therapy. And that was what I felt really gave him and us the strategies to kind of deal with where he was at, and to be able to learn and to, operate in life. So that's just a little bit my background.
Thanks, Anne. Yep. Yeah, so today we're really excited to talk about the road to self-regulation and all that goes into it, because it can be a multi-step process. So Mark, if you think we're okay, we'll go ahead and get started. All right.
I think we're good to go. We got 13 on board, so I think there'll probably be a few more that trickle in, but I think that is a good place to start. 14. Hold on. Okay. One more. Okay.
Hello. All right.
Go ahead.
All right. So Anne's going to let us know a little bit about our agenda for today.
Okay, so we are, as we said, here to talk about self-regulation. What is self-regulation, then self-regulation and how it relates to sensory processing, the foundational role of co-regulation, in other words, how you are as a parent or caretaker involved in the regulation with your child. Then we're going to be speaking about how to scaffold self-regulation expectations, kind of what are the steps and what are the just right amounts for regulation of scaffolding. We're going to talk about co-regulation strategies and, throughout development. And then finally, we'll do a Q&A so we can have a discussion and you can ask any questions you may have. But if throughout you have questions, you can either put them into the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask a question. Sometimes it's a little difficult with Zoom, back and forth. So that's why, also using the chat may work as well.
Great. Yes. And I can see the chat on my end, but I think Mark or Ann will let us know if a question pops up.
Right. Okay, so our first question is, what is self-regulation? So if you can just take a moment and think about what you think of when you think of self-regulation, and you can either unmute yourself and kind of throw out what you think that might be, or just jot it down in the chat and we can talk about that as well. Does anybody have any ideas of when they think about self-regulation, what that might be?
I mean, I think for me, you know, I have two daughters with issues around this, and they both have sensory integration issues, but then one of them has quite profound sensory, you know, disability really. But it's about using the options that we've explored and trying to find a way of controlling, particularly out of control behavior that might hurt them or hurt somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
But for me anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. That's a great definition.
Yeah. Anybody
All right.
else? So here's a definition that we're putting out there. So self-regulation is the ability to manage your energy states, emotions, behaviors, and attention in ways that are socially acceptable and help achieve positive goals, such as maintaining good relationships, learning, and maintaining well-being. So this is one definition of self-regulation, and you can see that there are many factors involved, components involved in, you know, if you think about how you regulate yourself, you know, and there can also be, definition doesn't mention it, but cultural and personal factors that come into play as well. For instance, you know, what is acceptable in one culture may be different in another culture. What is acceptable in one family might be different than what's acceptable in another family. So I don't know if, you know, anybody can think of an example of this. What, you know, might be okay for you is not okay for another family.
Yeah, I see sometimes meal times can look very different for different families. Like some families have the expectation that we all sit together for a family dinner, and then other families, you know, maybe due to scheduling constraints or other factors, you know, like to kind of spread it out, or maybe, you know, eat more leisurely. So I think it can vary, and there's no right or wrong. It's kind of just about finding what's right for your family, and then modeling the social, the self-regulation skills needed for kind of what you want your family structure to look like.
Yeah. So,
all right. Yeah, so next we're going to talk about some tools for self-regulation. So as Anne kind of read that definition, it did include a lot of components. So when you're kind of talking about an overarching definition like self-regulation, there's going to be a lot of factors that go into that. So we really want to be able to stop, think, and self-reflect and self-monitor in the moment. So that means adapting our plan in the moment if we're kind of headed down a path, and we kind of have the ability to right ourselves in terms of being able to stay calm in the moment given a series of unexpected events. Internalized social rules. So that's kind of what we talked about too, with like family dynamics, and, you know, even going over to a friend's house, like you'll kind of like assume their family rules, kind of, you know, maybe not explicitly said, but kind of being able to modify your behavior accordingly is a really, you know, advanced skill that does take some practice to kind of get the hang of. Express oneself verbally. So articulating your thoughts, feelings, and emotions. It's something we all continue to work on as we, you know, mature. It's often really difficult for children to be able to articulate what they're feeling, or even labeling their feelings at all can be really tricky. And also nonverbal communication. So picking up on how others are feeling based on their body language, and then using your own body language to kind of tell the world what you're thinking and feeling. Controlling impulses is another tricky one. So that's kind of having a thought and holding on to that thought, but not necessarily acting on that thought. So sitting in school all day, you know, is you know, can be really tricky for children with impulse control difficulties of constantly having to self-monitor. Okay, I really want to do this, but I have to wait until it's the right time. The last tool on here is integrating sensory stimuli. So that's a really important one, and I'll talk about that more on the next slide. So this is the pyramid of learning that in the sensory OT domain, we often use to explain sensory processing. So as you can see at the bottom of the pyramid is the foundation of all these higher level skills that continue to build. At the top of the pyramid, we have academic learning, activities of daily life, which could be self-care, meal times, social activities, and then behavior, right? Are you able to sit still in school when you need to? Are you kind of able to, you know, behave when we're in a group setting and follow the group plan? So all of those skills are higher level, and they're really built on intact processing down at that foundational level. So when we think about the sensory systems, we're going to think about the 5 we always learned in school, which, you know, taste, touch, smell, hearing, and vision. Those like are ones that immediately come to mind, and they're so important. But there's also 2 lesser known systems that are really vital to sensory processing, and those are the vestibular and proprioceptive systems. And I'll tell you a little bit about those systems, because I think that will help inform some of the strategies that we're going to mention later on. So the vestibular system is located in your inner ear, and anytime you shift your head, you're going to activate that system, and it's going to say, all right, I know I'm shifted off balance, and how much or how little do I need to move my head in order to maintain equilibrium? So how much or how little we register that movement input. You know, sometimes movement is self-directed, meaning we're the ones running, and then sometimes it's imposed, meaning we're sitting in the back of a car, feeling that movement more passively. So how we process that, you know, impacts our ability to kind of move and navigate through the world. And that system works hand in hand with the proprioceptive system. So the proprioceptive system is your body's awareness of itself, right? It's located in your muscles and your joints, and it provides feedback about where your body is in space. So, you know, this could seem really automatic, and for many people it is. But, you know, when you have a child try to imitate some poses during Simon Says, you'll often notice for some children with sensory processing, they'll look down at their body to kind of, you know, mimic a simple pose. So we really want is to kind of know where our limbs are in space and not have to necessarily put cognitive effort into being able to position our body the way we want to. So anytime there's difficulties with proprioceptive processing, we're going to have trouble controlling our body, sitting still. Sitting still is like the highest form of vestibular and proprioceptive processing together. So it really, you know, you have to have everything working well in order to maintain that equilibrium and focus on the task at hand. As we talk about strategies later on, you'll notice kind of a theme of talking about proprioceptive input in particular. So this is input to your muscles and joints, like I said, and that can, you know, happen through heavy work activities, which would be like, you know, climbing, crawling, you know, animal walks, hanging from a trapeze or a monkey bar. All of that's going to provide more input to your muscles and joints. And also by deep pressure input. So like a firm hug is an example of proprioceptive input that's regulating to our system. A weighted blanket, some kids and adults find really regulating. So it's kind of thinking about the sensory profile of your child, but also as a theme, we can safely say that for many children, proprioceptive input, deep pressure, heavy work input throughout the day will provide kind of a baseline level of regulation that will then help them tolerate some of the more non-preferred sensory stimuli, like let's say tactile is an issue for them. Pairing that aversive tactile input with more regulation, even like a gentle squeeze can really help tamp down that response a little bit. So I'll just give you one example of what sensory processing can feel like for children. So if you picture yourself, as an adult and you're driving to a new location and it starts to rain and you're listening to your GPS, but your passenger's blaring music and you have your uncomfortable, clothes on from an interview and you're, so ready to change and, you kind of got rerouted and now, you finally arrive to your destination and you're just exhausted. So that can be what sensory processing can feel like throughout the day. And this can happen a lot, with children because they don't really have control over their environments a lot of the time. So a lot of the input that's coming at them can feel a little bit out of their control. So dysregulation can look differently based on the sensory profiles of different kids. On the whole, some signs you might want to look out for is kind of difficulties with body awareness and controlling our bodies, difficulty, assessing personal space in the moment, you might fidget, have low frustration tolerance. It might come out as, frustrations in terms of like aggression, in terms of really seeking out more proprioceptive input in more of a maladaptive way, like throwing or kicking, or it might mean like withdrawing and kind of avoiding some challenging or unexpected situations. So with that, all of what we talked about, like with that driving scenario, at the end of the day, you're going to have mental fatigue. You're going to feel really drained, and that makes it even harder to kind of build those higher level skills at that top of the pyramid, including self-regulation. You're going to have like no gas left in the tank for that. You can have a fight, flight, or freeze response. So that fighting we talked about, in terms of seeking more of aggressive behaviors to kind of give your body more input. Fleeing, you might feel like, you notice your child's running out of the room or avoiding, or freeze. Maybe they just kind of are a deer in headlights and you're kind of talking to them and you don't have their attention and you don't really know why. One example I think is interesting is, just thinking about how this can impact behavior. So if we have a preschooler and they're waiting in line, right, ready to go out to the playground and everyone's brushing up against each other and we're feeling some tactile input and they run and flee to the, out the hallway. That's a really like observable behavior. And a lot of the time we might not immediately notice, the teachers and the parents, that maybe there's an underlying sensory processing route that kind of elicits some of the behaviors that you're noticing. So I just think that's an important thing to keep in mind as we talk about working towards self-regulation, is really thinking about what the triggers are and the factors contributing to dysregulation, because that's the only way to kind of then work through some tools to be able to self-regulate in spite of some of those challenges. Okay.
So now we're going to talk about the importance of co-regulation, and what we mean by that is excuse me, a supportive process between the caregiver and the child that fosters regulation. So as a parent or caregiver, I'm modeling always. My own behavior is a model for regulation for my child, and supporting them in their regulation. So an example of co-regulation might be, so if I think of something that happens to me that might be frustrating, like let's say I'm toasting a piece of toast and I burn it. And so then, maybe to model for a child, that's frustrating, it's annoying, what can I do? So, the first thing is to kind of identify how you're feeling, and that's modeling, labeling your feelings. So, oh, I'm so frustrated, this is annoying, I burned this toast. Oh, what can I do? Well, there are choices. I could either, scrape the burn off and eat it anyway, or I can make a new piece of toast. So, right there, I've kind of identified, I've labeled, I'm really frustrated, I don't have the time for this, but here's the things I can do. And then, I do them and I move on, but I've talked about it and I've dealt with it. So then we're going to talk a little bit about laying the groundwork. So early childhood is an important window to, it's the time when you want to kind of foster that co-regulation so that the child is able to eventually self-regulate. So all the things we're doing as modeling and facilitating the child's self-regulation is setting them up to be able to be independent in their own regulation. Self-regulation continues to develop and, become more refined as we become a teenager, and then even in early adulthood. So, we have different experiences and, each teaches us things. We kind of learn from everything we go through, even as adults, our mistakes, things that happen, which, can also be used in co-regulation. If you have a situation with a child that happens and it didn't go so well from a regulation standpoint, then kind of looking back, in the moment is very difficult to deal with, because of what Marysa talked about, that fight and flight, anxiety, just the feeling in the moment. It's difficult to identify, but afterwards, kind of looking back, what happened, what can we do differently, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, kind of looking at the size of the problem. So that's just kind of talking about laying the groundwork. So now this is a winding road. And what, we want to say here is that, the road is not always even. There are ebbs and flows to self-regulation, and we're kind of always figuring that out. Even as, adults, we're looking at that. But what, we as parents, caretakers, we kind of learn to anticipate what are the triggers for, the arousal, your child's arousal. So if for instance, that transitions are difficult for your child, there are strategies that you can put in place prior to making a transition, like, let's say, for instance, using a timer or talking about the schedule of the day, or, things like that, or some strategies that to put in place. And, ultimately the hope is that, you learn the triggers of your child, and then ultimately that the child will learn their own triggers by us, kind of modeling the behavior, talking about it, and learning what might cause them stress, and learning strategies to deal with that. So there are scaffolded steps to self-regulation. And what we want to talk about, or what you think about, is what is the just right amount of co-regulation support for your child in order to build self-regulation skills. So, it's individual, and there are some factors that, we've outlined here. So age is one, which may be different for each child because children develop at different stages. Two children are 5 years old, but their development level is maybe different. So also periods of stress and change are factors to consider. So extenuating, we're talking about here extenuating circumstances. So for instance, I talked a little bit about transitions, or change, a new school, a new home. That's, none of us really like change. And then, it's tough, and maybe for some more than others, it can be particularly difficult. So how do we deal with this? What are some strategies that might help to deal with this? And then Additionally, you might have a diagnosis with a child of autism or ADHD, or maybe a medical diagnosis, which plays into, can play into your self-regulation. And finally, the sensory processing challenges. So, what are those for, each child?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Marysa. Sorry.
Yeah. So given what Anne said about, those factors and how they interplay with each other, and like Anne said, it's dependent on periods of time in your life. Like even COVID's a big stressor that has kind of maybe flipped self-regulation skills on its head for a lot of kids who maybe weren't having difficulties before, or suddenly seeing that now they're having more challenges. So like like Anne said, with the winding road, it does take twists and turns. And I think what we're going to talk about next is setting attainable expectations. Because I think, having hope and be able to kind of assess progress is really crucial towards facilitating the confidence and independence with self-regulation in children. So as occupational therapists, sometimes we offer what's called a goal meeting with families who choose to participate in that. And what those meetings are like kind of just a discussion and getting into maybe like more of the nitty gritty, factors in your routine and where you're seeing the breakdown happen at home, so that we can develop measurable goals for the home environment, right? So that's taking into account, okay, what does family dinners look like for you, right? How many siblings are at the table? When is this happening? What's the length of time you like to sit as a family? What are the, daily expectations for your child? Is it for them to unload the dishwasher, in the morning after breakfast? So just kind of, getting to the root of the family structure and seeing how then we kind of add in some goals for self-regulation throughout the day. So one of the things I find sometimes is, our families come in and they have a goal, which is a great goal of, Sally, their child, will be able to self-regulate. That's a really fantastic goal. But as we talked about, with that definition earlier, that self-regulation can encompass a lot of components, right? And so I think, for Sally to develop self-regulation, it's really in her best interest to kind of parse out what areas or how we're going to best get to the self-regulation goal. That way we set Sally up for success, and the parents feel a little bit more in control of how to get from point A to point B in terms of self-regulation. So I think a great way to kind of assess self-regulation in your child would be to kind of consider the amount of co-regulation support you're currently giving, and then where we want, to be in 6 months with the co-regulation support. And so what that can mean, if we take Sally as an example. So, when given the choice of 2 strategies, Sally can successfully select and implement a regulation strategy about 80% of the time. So why we like this goal is the first part of it gives the parent, teacher, caregiver an actionable step, right? What they're doing, giving the choice of 2 strategies. And then facilitating some independence. So Sally then can select independently and implement, more independence about 80% of the time. So you'll find in goal making, it's rarely 100% of the time in life, because most of us can't do things 100% of the time. So I think having a majority of the time as your goal can help, make it all seem more manageable, so you don't feel so derailed when you have a bump in the road and it feels like a setback. But then you can kind of take a step back and kind of look at, the breadth of what's been happening, and 8 out of 10 times she's been doing really well. So I think that's just an important piece to keep in mind for parents, because it is so tricky, especially with all going on with COVID, right? To like find the positive and take, find that progress, especially when you're with your children every day. Sometimes you'll notice you'll go to a friend's house and they'll see changes in your child that you haven't seen. When you're with someone every day, it's harder to pick up on progress. because little things, happen every day, and it's harder to take note of those. So, as, Sally matures and gets, a little bit more consistent with this goal, right, of our parent offering our strategies and implements it, then we can kind of move into a new phase, right? Can Sally spontaneously, conjure up a tool that she can use and implement it the majority of the time on her own? So that's kind of like the scaffolded approach that Anne talked about, kind of with those goal setting skills. In terms of the strategies, like an example could be for a parent seeing Sally, and we know we're going to a birthday party, which has previously been non-preferred and we're avoidant of, and we get overwhelmed by the music and the friendships, and we have had a tendency to want to leave early. So that's something the parents can know before about their child. Pick up on triggers, right? And stress cues of your child, right? So is Sally in the car, biting her nails, kind of avoiding or feeling frustrated? And then that might be a good time to offer those two strategies before you go into the birthday party. So it's about also, recognizing the moment where it's best to kind of come in and give that support. And often what can happen is parents kind of wait a little bit too late, just because, everything seems to be going well. She hasn't mentioned she's nervous about the party. And then at that time, we've already kind of let it go a little bit too far, and we've lost her because we're starting to get in that fight, flight, or freeze response. And it's a little bit harder for her to then access, the higher level skills needing to kind of select and implement one of the strategies you recommended. So even taking a proactive approach and offering it, before signs of significant dysregulation is a great strategy to kind of take hold of in order to give yourself a little bit more control as the parent, and to kind of anticipate some challenges that you think may happen down the road. And hey, all it could do is help, because if we're offering regulation strategies, like a simple, all right, let's give ourselves a bear hug starting at our shoulders and squeezing all the way down to our hands, that's only going to help ground, both of you in the moment. So I think it's a really great habit to get into as well.
Marysa, I was just going to add one thing as far as the goal, like the goal meeting. We, as occupational therapists and as parents, I'm sure too, are looking always at assessing and then reassessing. So, okay, we've reached that goal, and then what's our next goal? Because, like Marysa said, you may not notice how your child has been successful and the leaps they've made, but then so they get to, the goal we've set in the goal meeting, then we are always, as OTs in the clinic, we're always setting new goals because we see they've reached that goal. Okay, then what, like Marysa said, what's the next piece that we're going to be working on? So.
Right, exactly. And these kinds of goals are just kind of a way to frame your thinking. It's not necessarily homework for you to go out and write specific goals, but I think it's helpful in just kind of shaping our expectations when it comes to self-regulation. So next up, we're going to talk about some co-regulation strategies parents can implement throughout the developmental phases. So I had a little bit of experience in the NICU before coming to SASCO, and what you see in the NICU is, lots of sensory processing challenges and signs of stress cues. And that happens in infancy, and it can be totally normal. But what you'll see is this finger splay and a jerking of your movements. Hiccups can be a sign of stress. So it's really, as occupational therapists in the NICU, our job was to kind of notice those stress cues and then offer regulation support. So as we talked about before in that pyramid, that proprioceptive system, the deep pressure, heavy work system, was used in infants by using kind of gentle but firm pressure to kind of provide calming input. So what you could do is gently cup the head with your hand, and then kind of bring the hands close to the chest and gently cup their arms to their chest. Even something as simple as that and holding that position for a little bit, you start to see the calming response happen really quickly. The skin-to-skin contact between a parent and infant, you know, is often a second nature, but there is some sensory reasons behind why that's so important. And so the child lying on your chest, you know, gets your warmth, your smell, you know, the textures of hair and skin and all of that, while also kind of getting some deep pressure, because we do tend to kind of hold and support a little bit. So all of that is a really regulating experience. At infancy, we'll start with the routine and structure and consistency. That's going to be a common theme throughout the developmental phases. Humans love structure, and providing some structure is important while also providing some flexibility. So it's like kind of, you know, a double, you know, kind of contradictory at times, or can feel that way, but it's about having like our basic structure to our day, but having moments of flexibility and spontaneity in our day to really feel like our children and us as adults can kind of go with the flow and kind of manage transitions and unexpected changes. So pediatric massage is another great one. Again, that's that proprioceptive input. Therapists who are trained in pediatric massage have certain strokes that work really well for sleep, circulation, and even bowel movements. For parents, it doesn't have to be a particular stroke. It can just be a bonding experience, and you kind of gently, you know, massage the legs, and again, just that deep pressure input it is so regulating, and you'll often see just such a melting response from the infant. So as we kind of move onto toddlerhood, this is our, you know, we're learning through our sensory systems at this point, right? So we want to expose them to a variety of vestibular activities, you know, jumping, swinging, imposed movement, self-directed movement, proprioceptive activities like climbing and crashing and crawling, and all of it, we kind of really want them to get out and explore their environment. We want to try out a variety of textures, both with our hands and as we start to taste new foods. And then also, you know, auditory input. Can we tolerate, you know, having our sibling kind of play in the same room as us and not feeling overwhelmed? But what you will notice as parents is sometimes if your child has sensory processing challenges, you might go to the beach and all of a sudden you're like, they're showing some signs of dysregulation from the sand, let's say. So the tactile input, which is, we haven't had a ton of experience, you know, in toddlerhood yet with sand, and it's a novel experience for them. And we're seeing a little bit of finger splay, and we're seeing like a stiff posture. And as a parent, then what can we do in that moment, right? So there's a few things you can do. So you can think back to the proprioceptive strategies and say, okay, I need some deep pressure input for my kid, or some heavy work input. So even some gentle hand squeezes, right? Like, okay, let's get that sand off, and we're going to squeeze the hand. You know, adding in some, you know, heavy work activity. Okay, can you fill up this bucket of sand and bring it to the water? Anything to make that, you know, stimuli, which right now feels a little bit uncertain or aversive to them, more regulating. And then I would, you know, shorten the experience a little bit, right? Not drastically so, but let's not, you know, prolong an experience that we feel like our child is continuing to show signs of dysregulation. If we add in the regulation input and they're feeling really great, I think that's a great time to like naturally, you know, end for the day and then kind of try again another day. So shorter spurts of really positive interactions will really help long-term them associate trying something new, feeling regulated, and having a positive outlook on it. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to chat in the chat box or let us know verbally. So some other strategies you can use in toddlerhood, like Anne was talking about before, modeling rules and expectations, as well as appropriate coping tools. you know, sometimes it's like okay to be exaggerated about it. Anne won't mind me saying this. She spilled her soup everywhere yesterday. And I was thinking, we were saying like, if we had a little kid nearby in a session, we didn't at the time, but you know, it would have been a fine time to be, okay, all right, Miss Ann needs a few deep breaths. Okay, we're gonna, you know, time to go get some paper towels. Talk out loud and make it really actionable. Instead of sometimes we have a tendency to be silent, and kids can really sense our frustrations and then feel like, you know, oh, I don't know how this is going to resolve. So kind of problem solving out loud and using humor is a great way to respond to those things. We want to encourage attention, even in toddlerhood, just for, you know, a few minutes, but really having that positive attention time to focus on a joint activity, right? Building, you know, coloring, anything like that, just to kind of start to encourage attention, because attention, you know, is needed for all those higher level skills that are part of self-regulation, like to self-monitor and to control your impulses. And then start, you know, briefly delaying gratification, right? So, you know, having that ability to just hold on to that thought of excitement and wait just a little bit for that thing that you're really excited about is a great thing to start even in toddlerhood. And Anne will talk next about childhood.
So, you know, we're talking about this co-regulation and strategies as you move from toddlerhood to childhood. So here are some ways throughout the day that you can foster regulation. You know, we talk about heavy work activities and using the helper role in regulation. You know, the heavy work is the proprioceptive, and that's kind of, you know, you can equate it to yourself going to the gym, and, you know, the release of endorphins you get from that is kind of the same thing that children receive when they're doing heavy work, when they're hanging, you know, from the monkey bars, or they're jumping and crashing. They're getting that same kind of feeling and release that we get when we, you know, or even like, you know, if we take a long walk, you know, just getting that, you know, the input from the environment, how that feels. So, you know, involving children in being kind of a helper, in a helper role, can be regulating as well. Just, you know, you get that heavy work again from like carrying the groceries in from the car, pushing the shopping cart in the store, doing yard work. That's all, they're getting input from that as well. And not only are they getting the input, but at the same time building confidence, because they're, you know, they're being a helper, they're helping getting the job done, and it's an offer, a level of independence that, you know, they feel good about. And we use that a lot in the gym. You know, for instance, if we do, a lot of the children love, I don't know if any of you've heard of this, but shaving cream skating, where we set them up, we put shaving cream on the floor and they take their shoes and socks off and they roll up their pants, and then they hang from a trapeze and they skate in the shaving cream. And, you know, after that, we clean it up together. You know, the children will mop the floor up and they love it. You know, they loved, and that's that heavy work. And it's also, they can see the accomplishment. Oh, wow, look, you just cleaned that whole thing up. That's so awesome. You know, so it's, you know, fostering that independence and, you know, competence as well, that they were able to do that, yet you're giving them the input at the same time. So, you know, we talked about, Marysa and I, when we were doing this, putting this presentation together, about you know, as Marysa mentioned earlier, COVID, and how, you know, the effects of that for a lot of children sitting in front of those screens, the screen all day, and how difficult it is. And, you know, the importance of giving those movement breaks and giving the heavy work, you know, just taking breaks throughout the day, you know, how important that is. So, you know, we just wanted to, you know, add that in there, as well as that, you know, for the child to even take a break, even if the school, I think, isn't necessarily doing that, if they have to sit and watch the teacher, you know, just even having them stand at the desk and do some, you know, hand pushes or, you know, things like that. It's important. So co-regulations, moving on, you know, more strategies. You know, we talked earlier about anticipating the triggers for your own child and being proactive. So, you know, you may know that, you know, transitions are difficult for your child, or changes in routines. So, you know, you might beforehand talk, I think I mentioned this earlier, talk about the schedule of the day, or, you know, what you're going to be doing for the day, or even right before you go, kind of talking about what's going to happen, you know, making a transition, kind of giving warnings, using a timer, that kind of thing can help with that. So you're kind of anticipating this is going to be hard for them, and I'm going to throw in these kind of, you know, strategies to help them deal with this. So we did talk earlier also about the size of the problem. So, can anybody throw out a problem that maybe, their child has had, like I talked earlier about, burning my toast. You think of
and spilling your soup, Anne. I don't know.
Oh, that was a big one.
I don't know what's going on with you.
It went all over me, all over my pants, all over my shirt. It was beautiful. I picked it up, it exploded. It was crazy. So,
but I was thinking, one of my kiddos I work with, sometimes it has to do with like a preferred mask, right? Like we have our preferred mask on and we had to wash it and we don't have it for today. Like that could be a problem that kind of sets us off in the morning time that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And then identifying, sometimes, I say like, is it a big problem, small problem, or no problem? And I think using humor a little bit, like sometimes they answer big problem, which is okay. And that's kind of how they feel in the moment. But then you could be like, oh man, we have to go to the, hospital, or like, just kind of make it really funny and dramatic. And then they kind of start to like, just laugh. And then we kind of reset it and start again. And I think sometimes it's just, helpful to use humor in that moment. And then, it's totally okay if they perceive it as a big problem, but then how can we take steps to, make the problem smaller, right? Is the actionable plan.
Right. So it's kind of validating their feelings. So, I can see you're really upset by this. You forgot your mask, or, and then, oh, look, I have another one, or, what can we do? Or, that kind of thing. In the moment, it's overwhelming. And how can we make the problem smaller? And again, that's that giving them confidence and independence to kind of be a helper in solving the problem, and that feels good. It's that being able to yourself do something, and that's empowering for children. So. Problem solving solutions, and then offering that modeling behavior. I'm going to take a deep breath. Oh, that makes me feel so much better. And also modeling the empathy, perspective taking, frustration tolerance. So empathy, being, I see you're really sad. I'm sorry you're feeling that way. And then kind of the perspective is, okay, is this a really big problem, or is there some way we can resolve this? And then frustration tolerance is, I see you're really frustrated. Well, let's do a couple of big jumps, or, wall push-ups. What can we do? Then we are, can you move to the next slide, Marysa? I'm sorry. Okay, so again, we're talking about creating more opportunities for independence and self-monitoring on multi-step activities and routines. So we talked a little bit about that, involving the child in solving the problem. And, you know, something that, you know, I learned a long time ago or read somewhere, and it was just a takeaway that I had, is that anything the child can do on their own is so important to allow them to do. You know, it builds that independence and confidence. And so a lot of times it's easier for us to do it for them, like, you know, tying their shoes to get out the door, you know, throwing the stuff in their backpack to get in the car to go to school, all those kinds of things. But to set them up for success and, you know, allowing more time in the morning, allowing more time before you have to get to, you know, an event, you know, for them to be able to tie their own shoes, to be able to, you know, maybe pack the backpack the night before, kind of setting them up for, you know, success on their own, to be independent. And one thing we talk about is using checklists and visuals to facilitate independence. So, you know, for instance, you could have a visual of what needs to go in the backpack, you know, and, you know, it could be on a whiteboard, or even just visuals that you print out. And then each day they look at that and they check it off. Yep, I've got that, I've got that. And it just fosters that good feeling of, you know, I did that on my own. And it also frees you up, you know, to do other things.
So now we'll move to the adolescent stage. So adolescence is really a time of, you know, increased academic, personal, and social stressors. It can be a really challenging time for many kids. And like we talked about, you know, the peaks and valleys, like we might, you know, well, we were doing so well, you know, 8th grade, and then, you know, like just finding, you know, a setback, and that's like totally normal. And it's just a matter of reevaluating how you're going to be supportive to co-regulate, which is going to look different now that they're, you know, preteens or teens. And so you can kind of, you know, discuss and demonstrate strategies with your child to kind of, you know, help them manage all of the expectations that's now demanded of them. You can look at their schedule and kind of ask, you know, all right, how, you know, do you feel like we can add in another, you know, sport activity? Is this, you know, how do you feel about that? Does that, you know, does that help, you know, your body, you know, feel ready to do homework if we add in a sport before it's homework time? And I think sometimes getting their input on kind of what works best for their system, especially if they've kind of been educated in sensory processing, that can really help them, you know, offer more guidance on your end and kind of how they're feeling about all the activities in their schedule. So, you know, as a parent of an adolescent, you can kind of provide regulation opportunities that could have like a, you know, tactile fidget corner of your house. If they like sports, you can, you know, encourage the sports activities. Gym equipment can be really great for that proprioceptive input, especially as they mature and aren't as easily engaged in maybe more of the, like, you know, fun on the moment, off the top of your head kind of games that you previously facilitated when they were younger. But just kind of now rethinking about how we can make some of these regulation strategies more age appropriate for them. Swings are really great, even for adolescents. If you still have a playground, you can like consider just, you know, the playground swing is great, but you can also swap out some swings using the hook that's already there. Just dependent on kind of, you know, make it into a hammock swing or something else that they kind of feel would really help regulate their system. Because now, you know, sometimes, you know, stepping in as the parent, we might get some pushback from kids. So it's thinking about how, you know, you can create a net of caregivers and family friends or professionals like teachers and psychologists that your child can turn to for support. So you might not be the sole one offering the co-regulation input, right? We may kind of, you know, it's still, you know, as parents, you do an awesome job in now kind of delegating, okay, this person can kind of add in that co-regulation support, because right now it's a little bit harder for my child or my adolescent to kind of, hear those, strategy, offerings from me. Giving adequate time and space when upset. This is true throughout the developmental phases. So in a peak of a meltdown or feeling upset, like the auditory input most often from verbal cues is really, really hard for children and adolescents to process. It kind of can make them even more overwhelmed, making the feelings of frustration last longer. So you're going to want to think about that, no matter the age of your child, of how they're reacting to your verbal cues in the moment. So sometimes saying, I'll be over here, I'll give you some space for a few moments to help you calm down. Offering kind of those positive support that you're there for them, but then also not trying to process in the moment by saying, oh, what's so upsetting? Sometimes they don't even really know what's upsetting them in the moment. And so those kind of questions can be even more dysregulating. Demonstrating empathy and compassion towards yourself, I think, is an important one, and others. I think sometimes as parents, you all work so hard, and I think in modeling that ability to care for yourself and participate in self-care could be something you guys can do together. That could be really important, especially in COVID times. So continuing to establish really clear expectations and boundaries. That's another one that kind of carried over through all the phases. Delaying gratification even further, to have some of that intrinsic motivation, right? To kind of, we're checking it off, we're saving little by little, and then we're going to get that external motivator at the end. Maybe it's like to buy a pair of new headphones. I think having that, that kind of process is really valuable to adolescents. And I think sometimes you can maybe build in some regulation strategies if you're finding that it's hard for them to participate at home. Like you can't really get them to kind of engage in some experiences that would be regulating for them. Maybe it's kind of building that into kind of an external motivator. The last point is visual supports and positive praise. So I think sometimes, like with all the expectations adolescents have, it can be hard to remember to offer the positive praise. So if our goal is for them, they know that they have to unload the dishwasher and they haven't done it 5 days in a row, but then they've done it without you prompting the 6th day, I would praise that positively in the moment instead of drawing attention to the other 5 days, right? Praise that really positively, and then see if that has an impact on kind of what we do spontaneously going forward. I think it's sometimes just reframing kind of what we're going to call attention to can be really helpful for kids, especially a lot of kids with sensory processing needs tend to really hold it together through the school day. So they may, act out more at home, which could be frustrating of like, oh, why are they doing so well in school, but not at home? So I think it's just kind of having that awareness that they might be very, mentally fatigued at the end of the day, and offering some visual supports. Maybe they're having a hard time remembering those chores or fitting it in the moment. So a visual schedule or something they can check off can maybe, work towards kind of that delayed gratification model that they're really motivated by. Some other.
So I see something in the chat box from John Aronson. It says RT gets harder because you don't get picked for the team. You are excluded sport. So
you could jump on it and chat.
Yeah, I just was saying, like the sport was always very helpful when they were small, but now they're 12. It's really hard to find something where they can mix with the other kids in the school, because unless you're really, really good at it, which my kids have got sensory integration issues, so they're really not that good at sport. They don't get in the team. And if they don't get in the team, they're like excluded completely, which makes it really tough, because it's just at the age where they really want to mix with everybody. And if you don't attain a certain level of, ability, you get shut out of it, which is really tough.
That's such a great point. That's a really great point. I wonder if, I know some schools offer the ability to make more of a club if we have just like a few friends that are, you know, able to, you know, pass the soccer ball around, you know, kind of with a kind of more of a club instead of, you know, the you know, competing team. Something like a yoga group might be a nice thing to facilitate. I know the virtual kind of, you know, meetings with peers have been really successful for that age group. So like if, you know, it's her idea to kind of develop this yoga group with friends and kind of what that could look like. And that's a great, you know, way for you to kind of support and co-regulate where you can, of like, okay, you know, let's, you know, get matching shirts or, you know, something to kind of build up the support with it. But I think that's a great point. And I think unfortunately, I agree with you that like that input is so helpful for a lot of kids. And if we're not feeling successful in the competitive side, then we tend to just, you know, either are excluded or withdraw from it. And I think it's tricky, but I think trying to find out different ways or more roundabout ways to kind of add in that input that's really crucial would be super important. But thank you for bringing that up. And do you have any other thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it. I think, you know, maybe identifying what does the particular child or adolescent enjoy doing. Mm-hmm. And that, you know, could be gardening, it could be
oh yep,
you know,
Laura just chatted in the chat box saying karate has been really great for her son.
Right, it's different for, you know, I know someone else, you know, rock climbing, they go to, you know, it's just kind of finding that spot for your child. But I know it's difficult because it's so competitive sports, you know, even the parks and rec. I know, like for my own son, he absolutely loved basketball, but he was not tall and he couldn't make the basketball team. But so one of his favorite things was the parks and rec basketball, which was, they just went and played. And also there was another boys and girls club, you know, he did that through high school. And because he absolutely loved the sport, he couldn't make the team, but he still wanted to play, you know? So I don't know, it's kind of finding something for each child, how they can engage, and it's really hard when they stop making the teams. You know,
I agree. Rock climbing tends to be, and swimming tend to be really great ones, karate as well, because they can kind of achieve their personal best, but still be part of a group.
Right.
So those could be ones to look into.
Yeah. So I don't know, kind of thinking of ideas of your individual child. So now we're just, you know, talking about strategies, environmental strategies. So we've probably talked to you all about some of these things if we've done a parent training or just in conversations. Creating a warm, nurturing, and caring environment goes without saying, but you know, organizing and decluttering, this is kind of, you know, to deal with that regulation. So I know for myself, if I'm going to, you know, my kitchen is a huge mess and I want to cook something, you know, it's important for me to declutter it before I can even begin, because otherwise I'm overwhelmed by it, you know. So you know, even with smaller children moving their way up, you know, less is more. So, you know, if you have so many toys out, it can be overwhelming and dysregulation, and maybe a child will pick the toys up and start throwing them because they're overwhelmed by it. But, you know, kind of fostering that, playing with one toy, you know, when they're finished, oh, are you finished with that? Okay, let's put it away. And then we'll take out the next toy, kind of fostering that, you know, and then they help clean up. You're fostering that, you know, independence and confidence building that they can do this as well. You know, providing a cozy corner, tent, or room sort of for a calm down area. A lot of the children, when they come in the gym, they love we have what we call the cave. They love to go in there. It's kind of this tight space. We have little string lights in there, pillows, cushions, and they, you know, we'll go in there with them and kind of maybe even with a flashlight, but it's kind of just this calm down zone where I know I can go there to you know, I've been doing all this hard work. Now I can go in here and kind of feel better and calm down. It can be used in, you know, as a strategy in, you know, if they're upset, maybe that's somewhere they go to kind of decompress. And then, you know, providing fidgets and tactile bins, those are things, you know, stress balls, you know, moon sand, Theraputty or Play-Doh to push and knead. That kind of gives that passive proprioceptive input. You know, as it gets nicer out with younger children, bringing a tactile table outside, like doing water or sand, changing up what you put in it, rice and beans. You know, they're getting that environmental piece as well as the tactiles.
Awesome. So now it's a little bit time for questions and problem solving. Romy did say one thing in the chat I want to read. She said that the sports competition can be a great opportunity to learn about failure. A lot of kids and adults have, you know, can't handle kind of not making the team, and that can cause some self-regulation issues. And I totally agree. And so, yeah, like finding the alternatives and troubleshooting solutions out loud is a kind of a great way to kind of, you know, be faced with an adversity moment. I do know for some high schoolers who really have a love of a certain sport, but maybe aren't competitive enough to make the team, if they kind of show up and you know, try their hardest during practice and don't make it, I've seen some success with asking to be the manager, right? And then you get to practice every afternoon with them, and you have that manager role. But you know, that is just such a great example of you know, having that self-awareness and self-regulation to kind of not make a team, but then like, let's kind of talk with the coach and see if there's a spot on the team for you to help out in a different way. I think that just does wonders for kids going forward into college to kind of carve out how they're going to kind of make their schedule in life and all those activities work best for them.
I know I one of the extra complications I have a little bit is that I have twins and they don't necessarily like the same thing. And if I want to take one of them, I can't take the other. And but one of the things I did was I organized a running club when the COVID thing started. I organized a small running club 3 nights a week after school where they could invite 3 people each. And it became a kind of cred thing to get invited, I think. And that was kind of good. So until the weather changed in the winter, even though, I mean, I really want to get them away from home and meeting other people and feel like they're independent. I just couldn't find anything that I could get them both to that they would find acceptable. They're better outside than in. When it's indoor, they don't like the noise, the ambient noise in a gym or in a, you know, I've tried karate and I've tried swimming, and the noise in the swimming pool is just overwhelming. They can't bear it. So when it's outside, they're not too bad. But, you know, in the winter, it's particularly hard. But so what we did was we organized a little mini club, and one of the other parents made T-shirts, like you were saying before, that, you know, for about, I don't know, 2 months before the weather pulled in the winter. That was really good because they weren't seeing each other during the day because of COVID. And we just had an hour afterwards where they could play different things. And as long as they stayed, you know, spatially kind of apart, they could play and they could hang out and they could see each other. And that really kind of made a big difference for us. But as a general rule, once they turn 11, I just found it so much harder because it's not only about that, like the whole manager role, it's almost like putting salt in the wound because they're there, but they're not allowed to join in. And I couldn't, I suppose I really just wanted to share, it does get much tougher in that respect because they want to be like the other kids. They want to be independent. They don't want you to help them. They want to do it themselves, but it really gets much harder to do it yourself. Absolutely. And we've had a lot of blowout things that we haven't seen since they were toddlers. Right. Because they just get so overwhelmed and they've got the whole hormonal thing going on just like everybody else. Yeah. So I guess I was just throwing that into the mix.
No, that's a great point. The running club you mentioned is such a great idea. I think other families could really kind of take that and run with it on their own, you know, because you don't need much equipment. It's really kind of easy. But yes, I totally understand everything you're saying. And I think sometimes it's finding those other support people because they want to be so independent. where we can kind of, add in a little bit of that co-regulation strategies and maybe not have it come as much from mom and dad. Christine has a question in the chat box. Do you deliberately present to your children, let's make a calm down zone and call it this, or do you casually say, let's have it be your special chair? We have spaces that are not used enough sometimes at home, like bean bags and tents. If we label, do we label it, or how to get them in there with some buy-in? So that's a really great question. I tend to not associate the calm down space with, you don't want to bring it up kind of in the midst of a meltdown, because it will feel like a punishment. So like making it just a space, maybe, depending on their age, if they can have some say in designing, right? You have a budget of this much, and you can kind of, get this part of space in your room to make it into something cozy. Some kids really like to use like a walk-in closet and kind of, have the dimness of the lights. I think, utilizing their input and making it really exciting as a new space could be really helpful. And then, making it a fun space too, like, reading a book in there, so that, when it's time to calm down, it's not perceived as a negative when you offer that they might want to go in there, or sometimes they might just spontaneously seek out that space because it has all these comforting memories associated with it.
Yeah, and I think also modeling that, oh, I love going here. I love bringing my book and kind of getting my blanket, and it feels so good. It helps me feel, I feel so calm when I go in here. It really makes me feel good,
We had a space when my girls were little where we made it together, and then we put a big sign on the outside that had a picture, because reading was hard for quite a long time, and there was a big cross in it for extra people, and you could only come if you were invited by the first person. And I would say, right, oh my God, this has happened and I'm just feeling really bad. You can't come in, it's just me. And I'd go and hide in. And after about 2 or 3 times of me doing that, was something crappy happened, they would do it. I didn't have to say you need to go in there. They saw me doing it, and they were like, okay, this is crappy, I'm going in there. And they knew that nobody else could come in unless they invited them. There's got to be the invite possibility, because sometimes they need you there, but
that's a great idea, to give them a little bit more control.
Well, somebody at the OT in LA that we used to go to told me that, and it worked like a charm.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
What did you say, Christine?
I just said that was really helpful. I really appreciate that. That was really positive and fun.
Thanks for joining us. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to chat it or shout it out, or else we'll wrap it up. And if you have anything that comes to mind after the fact, you can always email Ann and I, and we can answer your question.
Also, thank you, Marysa, and we will be sending a recording of this session and a PDF of the slide deck for everyone who's registered, probably by tomorrow, maybe today.
Can I ask a question just quickly? Is like, I'm fighting so hard to get help for the girls in school, and they've just agreed to give them some help, and we're talking about this at school. Is it possible that I send it to the people at school that are working with the kids, or is that not allowed? I mean, the recording in the slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. You can forward the link. The recording will be on our YouTube channel. So
Okay.
You can forward them the link that I send you.
It just seems like the special ed teachers don't know what I'm talking about. It's really hard to kind of just talk about practical things that they could do in the classroom that they could share with the teachers. Okay.
Great.
We can also consult with them as well. If
we did that once for Reese, yeah. And I can't remember who came to our IEP meeting, but right. They just nod at you and go away, and it doesn't seem to make any impression at all.
I think specific strategies for the school, like, the cozy corner, attend the sensory diet throughout the day, they kind of need specifics because they're not immersed in this as we are, and as parents, and giving them specific strategies throughout the day. It's that preemptive anticipation of, so. But I
Okay,
think them
thank you.
watching as well is great.
Thank you everyone for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
everybody.
day.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Marissa. And
Thanks, Mark.
have a great day. Bye.
Thank you so much. Nice meeting you. Thank you.
Bye.